What does AI for good mean?
You need to have a societal contract nationally and internationally about what is good and what is bad. But it's in the consumer's hands to buy products that are safe, sustainable, and not just go for the cheapest solution. So we cannot just blame the ones in power, because the people, through buying, through voting, each of us has a responsibility in the end.
Today I'm delighted to have with us Ambassador Thomas Schneider from Switzerland. As the chair of the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence, he ended up negotiating the first binding international treaty. He's the person responsible for the organization of the AI Summit planned for Geneva next year in 2027. How is Switzerland positioning itself and thinking about its national AI strategy?
We are an open society with an agile and innovative economy and research ecosystem. If the Swiss label is on it, that goes for a certain quality, a certain reliability. It is important that countries have a choice from different suppliers, that they don't depend on one single or just two. It's also good that a country like India, that has made an enormous development in the past years with Indian digital stack, that can lead by example so that other countries are inspired.
Do you expect that global governance of AI is going to be easy, difficult, impossible?
It may be difficult to agree worldwide on something. We will not have a global treaty on everything about AI in the coming years. This is probably not realistic. Even if states are competing, they have an interest to guarantee each other the technology that they have doesn't get into hands that are completely uncontrollable.
In the Industrial Revolution, you picked fossil fuels as the primary driver of your industries. As a result, the earth and the climate are suffering. How do you think we might be able to find a balance this time and not repeat the same mistakes of yesteryear?
Until it's possible to go to Mars or live on another planet, we just have this one planet. And I hope that people will get this balance better than we may have done with the Industrial Revolution.
Ambassador Schneider, welcome.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Ambassador Schneider, I want to start us off with a question specifically about Switzerland before we move on to the broader set of questions around AI and global governance, which I know you spent a lot of years working on. But let's start off with Switzerland. Switzerland as a country has, of course, been at the center for global governance in many fields, not just in AI, is the home to many global governance organizations, of course, as well. But also as a country has positioned itself as a large industrial power, has large corporations based out of Switzerland in the traditional industrial world. And that's why my first question to you is, how is Switzerland as a country positioning itself and thinking about its approach to AI, its national AI strategy? What are some of the key pillars of that approach?
Thank you very much for this question. Well, you know, Switzerland is a rather small country in the middle of Europe of about 9 million people. We are an open society with an agile and innovative economy and research ecosystem. So for us, it is very important to have a rules-based national but also global order where everyone can freely develop, and as long as you respect some basic rules, respect some basic values, you can use new technologies to try and do some good, to try and create new innovative business models. This is the basic approach where we think, is something that is at the core of our engagement internationally. And this is why also nationally, we try to have a societal consensus about what are the limits, what is the framework in which this freedom to act, to innovate can be exercised. And so our principle is normally as much freedom, as little regulation as necessary, but as much necessary regulation as necessary, so that no one is left behind, that negative impacts are minimized. And this is the way that we function. Our participatory political system nationally, of course, has shaped our approach. Also internationally, we try to talk and listen to everyone. We try to find solutions that are acceptable to everyone. And within this framework, then, of course, people and industry can compete with each other. And so our national strategy is following the same lines. The basic framework, the bottom line is the convention that you mentioned of the Council of Europe that tries to make sure that existing protections of human rights, of rule of law, of democracy apply to AI system as to any other technology. And within this, countries are free to develop their own way of governance, to foster innovation, to allow progress, but within these limits of there's no need to create new further going rules, but we want the existing rules, the existing protection levels to apply also to AI. That means that whether human beings are working with each other or a decision is taken by a machine, if something is wrong, any person should have the right to challenge such a decision, whether it's about your personal social security or in healthcare. AI is used that people have the right to know what the machine is doing. If they don't agree, then they can take such a decision to a court. And therefore, there are some necessities for documentation in order that people can live an autonomous life within and use these technologies at the same time.
Yeah. So I think I've understood you correctly. Basically, on that spectrum of innovation versus regulation, closer towards innovation, only the necessary regulation so that there's the existing rights of the individuals are protected and societal goals are met, but at the same time, innovation is not hindered. Because every country is today, of course, grappling with that balance somewhere between that innovation versus regulation spectrum. Every country is trying to find its own sweet spot. Some countries, of course, are on the innovation extreme with very little regulation. And of course, some are higher on the regulation versus innovation. But from a competitiveness standpoint, also, Ambassador Schneider, if I may ask, one of the things that we are noticing around the world today is that there are two countries, the US and China, that have taken the lead in the world of AI. Switzerland, of course, ranks very highly on many metrics around R&D and innovation, at least the charts I've seen. How are industries in Switzerland, companies, corporates, and industries generally positioning themselves to make sure that they are not left behind? Because, as you've seen, I've written a book called The Great Tech Game, in which one of the key lessons I drew out from history was that games change. Games around competitiveness change, and new eras come around, new technologies come around. And if countries or industries keep ending up playing the previous game and don't reposition themselves or adapt to the new games, they often get relegated to the annals of history. So from that perspective, I wanted to ask you, how are industries and even the government in Switzerland repositioning itself for ensuring that Switzerland's competitiveness doesn't get hurt in a world where two countries seem to have taken the lead, seem to be spending all the R&D dollars, seem to have the best research talent, seem to have the best talent sitting there, but more importantly, a lot more capital being allocated, and then seem to have the critical resources also at their disposal. So the question becomes, for countries like Switzerland and others in the world, how are you going to position yourself for continued competitiveness?
Thank you for this question. And of course, I think every country, every economy, every society is challenged by new developments, but that's the way life goes. We already had the first industrial revolution where, for instance, Switzerland was way behind our neighbor countries when it came to building train lines, etc., etc. They were already discussing to build the lines around us because we were so far behind. And then some people in Switzerland, that was the middle of the 19th century, some people in Switzerland took action, and they did not just create railway lines. They created the famous ETH university that is now among the top 10 globally. Also, when it comes to AI, they created a banking system because there was no bank that was big enough to actually give loans to those that built the railway systems. So a whole ecosystem was created in a fairly quick time. We caught up. Now we are known as the railway country in the world, one of these with the most dense, most efficient railway system. So, and there are some similarities to now. There's new developments. The development is very dynamic. There's lots of decisions to be taken, and you don't only know ex post which one is the right one. I think we are trying to remain agile, remain dynamic. So be open to innovation. Also be open to take some risk. And this is when you say about regulation. We are a country that has never been ruled by a king. It's always a bottom-up ruled country with participatory democracy, and people want to also have the right to experiment a little bit and see how it goes. What are the real dangers? But as soon as risks turn into negative impacts, they also are very quick in asking for regulation. So I think this is our hope that we'll manage also this time to be innovative, to experiment. ideally in safe grounds, and then are able to produce good solutions that work. Also, that we try to keep up the trust in the quality of our services, that the trust in the quality of our political system, of our administration. I mean, nobody's perfect. We also make mistakes. But I think one of the assets of Switzerland is we are a small country. We can't do everything better than anybody else, but we can maybe do a few things especially good and concentrate on these where we're good at. And that people know, okay, if the Swiss label is on it, that goes for a certain quality, a certain reliability. There may be a price to it, but it's worth the price. And I think this is the logic that we are trying to pursue here in this new environment. And you see it already, you referred to, there's lots of really front-end research in Switzerland. There's a little bit less when it then gets to scaling up to big investments, then often Swiss inventions are actually then bought by bigger companies or go abroad. But that's to some extent part of life if you're a small country. But I think agility, the courage also to try and take risks, but again, a calculated risk, to always give the people the right to say, okay, stop here. We don't want to go any further. That's the core of our spirit. And we are trying to live the same spirit also when it comes to this new technology.
Yeah. And so, I like the historical context you provided here of Switzerland being maybe a bit behind at some point in the Industrial Revolution and then figuring out its own niche to catch up, whether it was the railways that you mentioned, which, by the way, on a lighter note, have featured very extensively in Indian movies and Bollywood.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And there's many a movie I could tell you about, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, where you would have seen the Swiss rail network and, Bollywood heroes and heroines in there. But the railways and the banking network, and then of course you have the, on the industrial side, you have the pharma and healthcare focus. Of course, people know your watches and chocolates and various other such industries that Switzerland has found its niche and built upon that quality guarantee also, as you referred to. What could that specialization or niche look like in the AI world, Ambassador Schneider? Is there already emerging thought in the policy circles or the folks in Switzerland thinking about this, whether in the private sector or the public sector, about what that equivalent could be in the AI world?
Yes, thank you. Actually, one maybe interesting detail is that Switzerland is one of the few countries that does not have a specific AI strategy as a political strategy. We have lots of digital strategies, underlying strategies, and we have a very distributed system, which is not run by a central entity that controls the whole country. Again, we try to, with the economy, with the research, with the academic ecosystem and the political ecosystems, to allow, like the internet, the intelligence is not in the center. The intelligence should be anywhere in the edges, and whatever is good will be picked up by others. And so, of course, you have people in the finance field that are looking into new applications in fintech, all the insurances. They are used to dealing with risks, so they use algorithms for a long time. They are used to using data. Of course, they know that this is an asset. They need to be at the forefront. The pharma industry, which is another big factor, is also, of course, they are aware that if you want to produce new medicine, if you want to have a good support with AI in healthcare, you need to have data. You need to have a certain mass of data, but definitely you need to have a certain quality of the data, because this is in the end about people's lives. So if you have bad data or biased data or what have you, that is not really suitable to if you have data that is only about men and you try to help women, then that maybe makes no sense, or you will not get the right results. So also there, quality of data, having access to data while protecting people's privacy and people's rights, but making sure that people share their data in a way that they can also benefit themselves from data. So we have we are not the only ones, of course, everyone makes these reflections, you have to, but a number of threads that we are trying to pursue in order to have an ecosystem. It's not just having algorithms. It's about having data. It's about having rules about how to use data. It's about also having the energy, having the infrastructure, having fiber to the home, having enough bandwidth. Having the skills of the workforce, having the skills of the administration. It's not just about one element. You may buy algorithms, but if you don't have data, or if you don't have the storage capacities and so on. So we try to see the big picture and how this all plays together. and advance everything to the extent that it's actually necessary so that we can step by step build on this. And also having good and serious risk and impact assessment mechanisms, which is also something that the Council of Europe developed in addition to the convention as a legal treaty, an impact and risk assessment mechanism also for human rights, democracy, and rule of law, because in the end, people care about a functioning political system. They care about freedom of expression. They care about having an impact on the social security and all of these things. So we try to advance on all fronts in a way that the ecosystem itself works out. And if something goes wrong, that we realize it and that we can correct it, always together with the people, together with the industry, so that we get a reasonable way of using these technologies while minimizing damage created to anyone.
No, that I think makes sense, to focus on the foundational pieces, the foundational layers, and then hope that the magic will happen.
And maybe one thing, of course, that I forgot, as I said, we are a population of 9 million people. We are growing every year, but we will not become as big as India for the next million years, I guess. So we need to, and we've always been partnering with others. Of course, we have our European neighbors that are very close to us, but we also have other countries. There's lots of economic and other cooperation with India and with other emerging economies. And of course, it is necessary to partner with each other in a peaceful and respectful way, so that we can create win-win situations, not just for us, but also for the others. I think this is important in a world that is as complex as and also the many challenges. I think we need to respectfully partner with others. Otherwise, no one will in the end get nowhere, because we are sharing this planet with many, many other people.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that this idea of AI for good, AI for all, an inclusive, sustainable AI framework, where you're managing risks yet enabling innovation, is, I think, ultimately what's the baseline for many countries around the world. But and that's including India, right? Including India, and I think many other countries in the global south. That's the starting point, or that's the broader framework that many policymakers want to embark on. But in an increasingly geopoliticized world, a world which is today characterized by fragmentation, fraying of old alliances, friendships, whether it's the transatlantic one or others around the world, where the rules-based order that the world has lived through for the last several decades seems to be under attack and in a state of churn. In a world like that, and where AI and emerging technologies have become, as I argue even in my book, have become at the core, have come into the core of that competition, do you expect that global governance of AI is going to be easy, difficult, impossible?
Well, things are impossible as long as you don't try to make them happen. So I negotiated this treaty, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm an economist and a historian. And we've had more or less troubling times also in the past. And there are reasons to why Switzerland is politically neutral. That's out of the history also of societies fighting around us in Europe. And when I say neutral, I don't mean neutral by values, but neutral in an armed conflict. I think there's an important distinction to make. I think we have to, even if not everyone is abiding by the rules, we have to remember what happened when people think that the strongest ones should win, because many people who think that they are the strongest, in the end, it turned out that they were not necessarily the strongest. And that in the end, if people go at war with each other, no one wins, but everyone loses. So I think for us, it is important that we remember that if we work together respectfully with some rules that we all determine together, that nobody imposes on others, but that we all determine together, that each of us is better off than if we work against each other. And again, if we define some rules which we can compete, then of course it's maybe those working harder, those that are better organized will get a little bit more. But we are convinced that although, of course, as you say, it is a difficult period with more instabilities and insecurities, that should not derail us from trying to keep talking together. How do we want to treat each other? How do we want to live together with each other? How do we want to compete with each other? And sometimes these voices are heard more, or sometimes these voices are heard less. And my historic recollection shows me that if people forget that working together is the better solution, that normally leads to catastrophes and situations where at the latest end people realize that maybe they should start working together, and in the end they're better off. This is a little bit of a cycle, of course, with human beings that tend to forget the past. But we are strongly convinced and deeply convinced that talking to each other, listening to each other, trying to, again, respectfully work with each other, respectfully compete, and make sure that no one is left behind, in the long run will be better for all of us. And we take note that some people may see it differently in the short term, but we hope that in the long term, this vision will be the one that will be shared again more seriously globally.
Absolutely. That's, I think, the right lessons from history that you've pointed to, that working together has led to more progress, even if it's maybe differentiated progress. Whereas if you end up in conflict with each other and one-upmanship, or trying to concentrate too much power or wealth in one nation or one group, it often leads to much greater backlash and socio-political upheavals. Going back even 100 years ago, World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, all of these I think you were alluding to are I think proofs from history that many times non-cooperation doesn't end up well, right? So I think thanks for sharing those, I think, very apt lessons from history. But let me ask you this, going deeper into this idea of global governance of AI.
Yeah.
AI, much like cyber and other emerging fields, is an area where, well, in the long run, as you rightly said, you hope for cooperation, you hope for better sense to prevail. In the short term, actors are trying to act in their own national interest as much as possible, to not have constraints, to not have things that bind them too much, right? Especially the countries that are at the leading edges of these technologies. In a world like that, do you expect that there are two scenarios as I envision them? One scenario could be that you negotiate global treaties that bring all the countries together, the majority of the world together, but the treaty itself is the lowest common denominator of what you can get everyone to agree on. Or there's a scenario where you agree on much more, but then you don't have everyone or the majority of countries there, but these are smaller groupings. They could be regional or like-minded countries, but a smaller number of countries. Which one do you anticipate we are likely to see in the coming years?
As you say, it may be difficult to agree worldwide on something. And again, I mean, a global treaty in itself is a piece of paper. If you don't have mechanisms to enforce it, you can then of course then it's difficult. And this is what happened to some treaty of some organizations. If there's no willingness to abide to the rules that you give to yourself, then so this is a constant discussion that you need to tell each other, that recall the reasons why you engaged in the treaty. But I think there's some. So we will not have a global treaty on everything about AI in the coming years. I think this is probably not realistic. The instrument that the Council of Europe has produced is a treaty that is not a European treaty. It's deliberately designed not on the European legal system, but on all countries that value democracy, human rights, and rule of law, at least to some level, that they can work together, agreeing on some principles that they can then implement in their own culture, in their own legal system, in the way they want. It is very, it gives a great freedom in the how, as long as you agree on the what, and the what is applying the same level of protection that you have now. That already differs in countries now, but at least applying the same level to AI. So, and I think we already had 55 countries that were part of the negotiations, including 10 countries from Latin America, some from Asia, and now we have Brazil that has joined also the process now to implement this, and many countries from Africa as well. So, and I think we should also not forget there is an interest on the one hand, even if states are competing and maybe not necessarily trusting each other, and we have seen this also in the Cold War, they have an interest to maybe guarantee each other some security, that the technology that they have doesn't get into hands that are completely uncontrollable or willing to sacrifice themselves and for, I don't know, religious grounds or so. So there are security interests that are shared even among countries that are the so-called poles. There's an economic cooperation between these countries. So there is some interest. It's always a combination. It's never a black or white. It's always a combination of competition or mistrust, but also shared interests. So that I think also there, and this is one of the strengths of Switzerland and of the Geneva ecosystem that we have. We try to provide for an environment where anyone can talk to anyone in the hope that this creates mutual trust and this fosters cooperation. And we are willing to continue to offer this space with all the experience that we have as a small player to foster dialogue. So I think, again, it's not black or white, and we should always offer and bring up the arguments that are there for cooperation, for giving ourselves rules and this is the important thing. It's not just a global rule that is defined by one country or by Europe. It's global rules that we define jointly, and ideally not just with the governments, but also with the industry, with academia, with the people, because in the end, also people have needs. People want to have a certain protection in every country. Depending on the democratic system, it's easier or more difficult to request this, but a government cannot just do what it wants. At some point in time, people will say, no, we want this or we don't want this. And then there are different ways of how this is played out. But in the end, it's, again, we're sitting on the same planet. And so we need to cooperate with each other. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's more difficult. And there's not one fits all solution. So we may have hundreds of treaties, we may have hundreds of legal and technical standards on AI applications like we have on cars or airplanes or standard software, because there's a need for some security, for some reliability of these systems, also just on a technical level. We cannot not cooperate, but it will not be black or white.
I think that's really the space for diplomacy, right? Where things seem difficult or impossible, but you still figure out ways to cooperate and ensure security and prosperity and progress for the countries who are coming together. You know, I mentioned this earlier. You've alluded to it. You were the chair of the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence, where you ended up negotiating the first binding international treaty, right, on AI. You've, I think, already shared some of the key principles maybe from that experience. But if I can specifically ask you to maybe articulate, reflect back, and think about what were some of the real practical challenges you faced in getting countries to come together to sign up to that binding treaty, and what are some of the practical lessons that you could offer, 3 or 4 main practical lessons you could offer from that experience?
So first of all, the Council of Europe is basically the institution that was created in Europe after the Second World War, also to try to have European countries, instead of going to war together, finding solutions for problems and fair solutions. And fairness of solutions is important, sitting at the table talking to each other. So this is it's like the UN for Europe. And there was a big discussion in the beginning. Should we do a treaty just for us? Because we have high standards. We have a court where, as a citizen, I can sue my country in front of the Court of Human Rights if I think that my rights are not respected. This is unique. Other regions don't have these instruments. They may have others. And I was also, as the chair and the Council of Europe, we were criticized for the decision that wasn't ours. It was the Committee of Ministers' decision that they didn't want a super strong solution for Europe, but that was ignored by the rest of the world. They wanted to have something that has a chance to become a global instrument. But that means that we cannot just depart from the European institution, the European logic. You have to be open and find solutions, find principles and implementation ways that go for the American system, which is different in many ways, that goes for Latin American countries, for Asian countries. But of course, that means, I wouldn't say do you have to go for the least common denominator, but you have to go more on the basis of shared values instead of relying on specific instruments that you're very proud of, but they are yours and they don't exist in another country. So that was one of the challenges. Let's say, how general do we go, risking that then this would be too general to have an impact, or how specific do we go, but then risking that we exclude the rest of the world from adhering to the instrument. That was a very big discussion within Europe, but also with the other countries. And in the end, again, I think we found a good solution that says no matter what your rights are in your country, the treaty makes sure that these rights, and they may be different from country to country, that these rights apply also to AI, which is less than maybe some activists were hoping, but at least it's something that basically we prolong the line from the pre-AI times into the AI times, which is something that it is what it is.
Yeah.
But it was a very hard negotiation, in particular between Washington and Brussels. And of course, they also had the national narrative that people in Brussels were under pressure to basically try and get the US to be more closely adapted to the European system, whereas in the US, they were under pressure that they didn't want to become Europeans and so on. So that was a very interesting, very intense, but also an interesting experience. And again, I think the key that I learned is the word interoperability. We are not the same. We are human beings, but our life circumstances, our histories are different. Our experience, our trust in governments, in power is different depending on your history. Again, some were ruled by a king. They went and killed him. Others, in my country, we never had a king. We've always been a bottom-up society where we want a government that has as little power as possible, and the people want to have as much say as possible. So we have different instruments. But what we want to make sure, we're also not a member of the European Union, which all our neighbor countries are. So we have slightly different ways in trying to achieve the same goals. And again, as long as we achieve the same goals, which is fostering innovation, experimenting with new things, but within some limits, some protection of rights of the people, of protecting the planet and so on. Then if we are interoperable in the ways we do things, that they don't have to be identical, that is an illusion, but at least in a way that allows us to work together, to share experience, to buy each other's products, use each other's services. Interoperability is, for me, it's become a buzzword, but it really makes sense because harmonization across the world is simply not possible.
No, I think that's key. The interoperability piece is key, I think, in this, so that you can continue to have choices. Your options are wide and broad, and you're not locked in either into one system or one set of technologies or one set of companies' products. And I think for any country that is today looking at the world, I think interoperability, strategic autonomy, these are all key objectives for countries and for consumers in those countries to make sure that they are not at the receiving end of either no choices or exploitation or lack of innovation tomorrow, right? The other piece that I want to shift gears to Ambassador Schneider is the idea for AI for good. We've discussed the AI for all, right, in many different, I think, ways. What we've spent the last few minutes on is AI for all and AI for good also. But I know that you are also involved, and there's a summit, AI for Good, coming up in July in 2026 as well, AI for Good. Talk to us about what that means. Help us unpack what AI for good from the perspective of Switzerland, or from the perspective of the world means, especially at a time when we were discussing earlier, when AI is getting geopoliticized, AI is becoming weaponized, AI's agenda, the agenda for how AI as a technology evolves, is being determined only in a few places in the world, and the priorities for that development are being determined by only a few people in the world. What does AI for good really mean?
Yes, thank you. Well, in fact, the AI for Good Summit is an event that the ITU, the International Telecommunication, which is based in Geneva, has started in 2017 in partnership with more than 30 other UN institutions, but also non-UN institutions, universities, think tanks, etc. They started with 200 people in 2017. Last year, they had like 11,000 participants. It's basically more than doubling every year. So we don't know yet how many there will be this year. And Switzerland is like the co-host of the event, but it's about 40 institutions that work together. And AI for Good means that with any technology, you can do something good or bad. Like a hammer, you can use a hammer to build a house, or you can use a hammer to crush a person's head, which is something that is very bad. So again, you need to have an idea what you should do with this. And we know by now that there's a huge potential to use data and AI, again, to make our health care systems better, to have a more targeted education system for people with special needs and so on. So there's a huge potential to use our scarce resources like energy, optimize our traffic system. So there's a huge potential everywhere with AI, but it can also be used for the opposite. It can be abused. It can be, and I think what you said before is crucial. It is important that people, that countries have a choice, that they can use different services from different suppliers, the ones that they don't depend on one single or just two. And I think it's also good that a country like India is that has made an enormous development in digital in the past years with the Indian digital stack and whatever is going on, that we have more and more countries that become players, that offer services, that offer good practices, that can lead by example in many ways, so that other actors, other countries are inspired, but that we can also choose, okay, this service is actually something that is good for me, or this fits our society, the way we work. We take this one and we don't use this one because, of course, AI for good. The question is who defines what is good and what is bad, and good for whom and good and bad for whom. So this, but the ITU, of course, and the UN system builds the AI for good on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which go from protecting environment and so on, but also to societal goals like education and skills and human rights and so the slogan there is leave no one behind. So if you use AI for good, the idea is that every single person in the world can benefit from AI and no one is left behind, to try and use that famous sentence, but that still makes sense to us. So, and the AI for Good Summit is basically a gathering to share these best practices from all over the world, from players, from industry, academia, governance, etc., civil society, that we can learn from each other how to use AI for good. It's not a necessary political event, but of course, sharing good ideas has a political power, because if more people are using it. But again, you can, like a car, you can use a car to drive somebody to hospital to save the life, or you can use a car like what happened in the past years several times around the world to drive into a gathering where people celebrate or people have a party. You can drive a car into people and kill them. So, and you cannot put a fence around every single gathering of people. And normally it's not daily that a car drives into people and kills them. So that you may have laws, but you also need to have a societal contract nationally and internationally about what is good and what is bad. And even if you don't have a law, a legal instrument for everything, to make sure that people feels responsible for themselves as part of this society, and by their own will behave in a way like treat your neighbor like you want to be treated by your neighbor. So AI for Good is something that only works, again, if you have shared values, if you have a discussion about what is good and what is bad. And the background for us that we still stick to is, of course, the internationally agreed sustainable development goals that are for us a very important guidance. And this is why we also support the ITU and UNESCO and all the partners, UNDP, etc., that work together with this AI for Good Summit. And there's other similar events that also try to help people to use AI for good.
The other piece that I want to touch upon, which you mentioned briefly as part of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, was the piece around the environment. The ecological impact of AI, the current approach being followed by the countries at the leading edge, is that of building bigger and bigger data centers, bigger and bigger models. And that's, of course, coming with very energy intensive requirements. The world has had, I think, again, going back to history, which you've been to also, an industrial revolution in the past where the energy or the ecological impact of the energy choices at that time were not necessarily taken very seriously. Going back 150, 200 years ago, you picked fossil fuels as the primary driver of your industries. You grew with scale as an objective, not a balance between environment and growth. And as a result, you've ended up in a scenario today where the earth and the climate are suffering. How do you and maybe Switzerland as a whole also think about this challenge between innovation and AI growth and innovation on one hand, and the ecological impact that these technological choices sometimes inevitably have, but the implications of which take sometimes tens of years or decades for the for humanity to realize. How do you think we might be able to find a balance this time and not repeat the same mistakes of yesteryear?
Yes, there's a big discussion to what extent people humankind keeps making the same mistakes. But the problem is the situations is always every time slightly different. But if you say also, of course, with the Industrial Revolution, it took some time for people to realize some of the negative effects. For instance, in the early 20th century, people were running behind cars because they liked the smell of the exhaust. They didn't know that this was causing cancer at that time, but we know it now for, I don't know, 70 years, and still we haven't fixed all the issues. And also, for instance, I think it's easier to fix the smaller issues like car safety. We introduce safety belts and other measures, or for instance, local environmental issues. Like I remember when I was a kid in Switzerland, we didn't have water cleaning all over and too much phosphorus. So there were some lakes where it was forbidden to swim 50 years ago. Now the water quality is so good you can drink the water out of a Swiss lake. But this is a local thing. If the neighbors, if those living at the lake agree, maybe we want to be able to swim in the river, or in the lake again, they can solve this problem locally, which is easier than to solve a global problem like global warming. And so I guess, yeah, to some extent also there will, first of all, we need to have enough research and confident, some level of security about what are the real problems, what are the real challenges. And we may still have people who deny this. We just witnessed recently some decisions about climate change that, yeah, you may question whether this is really based on so-called evidence-based policy making, but that's life. But again, there, I think we need a coalition of the willing to start with, to say, okay, we try to go with best intentions, find the right balance between being sustainable and thinking about the future of our children and grandchildren. Yeah, you will have competing interests. But I think as long as, until it's possible to go to Mars or live on another planet, we just have this one planet. And I hope that people will get this balance better than we may have done with the Industrial Revolution. And yeah, also there, I think we need to talk about technological solutions. Sometimes technological solutions can be solutions, but normally technology creates new challenges while you try to solve a problem. In the 1960s, people were thinking that nuclear energy was the solution to all the problems by coal and oil energy, and then we found out that maybe this also has some dangers. But then again, also with many things you do, if you have a safety net, for instance, if you have to pay for the risk you run, if a nuclear plant has to pay an insurance for the potential damage it may create, then maybe the plants wouldn't be built. So liability, I think, is a core issue. If there's an agreement that for whatever you do, you're actually liable. If you cause damage to others, then you have to pay for it. You can create incentives that make also industries or politicians behave, because if you're liable for what you do, you think twice, do I want to run that risk? But if you're not liable for anything, you can think, who the hell is paying the price? It's not going to be me. So also there, it is about how we work with each other, how we set the rules. We have a chance to do better. We are still human beings that are able to do good things or bad things, normally somewhere in between. So again, we think that dialogue and being honest and respectful and evidence-based policy making based on evidence would be the solution. I hope that we can convince as many powerful people, be it from politics or from industry, that they follow this road. But the people will have to, in whatever way they can, they have to insist and tell their governments, also tell the industry, use the product. It's in the consumer's hands to buy products that are safe, that are sustainable, and not just go for the cheapest solution. So we cannot just blame the ones in power, because the people, through buying, through voting, we give power to the people. So each of us has a responsibility in the end.
No, absolutely. I think I couldn't have put it better. I think ultimately the consumers, much like voters, have a way of shaping the choices of corporations and decision makers. that sometimes end up making decisions for the short term, and want to take the benefits onto themselves, but want to distribute the liabilities much more broadly. So I think very nicely put. Let me now move to the upcoming India AI Impact Summit, Ambassador Schneider. What are your expectations from this summit, especially as someone who will be leading maybe the organization of the next one? What do you expect and hope from this summit?
Yes, first of all, we are very thankful to our Indian friends that they host this. It's the first time that Summit India series, which is still young, is taking place in a G77 country. I think this is very good because, of course, the UK started this. They put a focus on safety because that was in 2023. That was a key issue. Then it was Korea, France. That every country put a particular focus that they thought is important from their point of view. So it's good to have a country like India presenting a focus from an Indian point of view. And we do have a lot of things in common. We may be Switzerland, we may be a so-called first world country, but we do have challenges that are the same. We need to make sure that everyone is educated, that people know how to use AI, what the risks are, but also what the opportunities are. We don't want people to not use AI because they may deprive themselves of opportunities. So you need to have access to technology. We have 4 languages in our country, which is not that much, but we have one that is spoken by 30,000 people and doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We try to also help them to use AI to help this language to survive. So it's called Romansh. It's like a mountain version of Italian. It's a Roman language which it developed in 5 countries. It's 2,000 years old. It's still spoken by 30,000 people, which would be a very small city in or town in India.
Neighborhood.
So we have, for instance, neighborhood. We have the Swiss universities have developed an LLM which is called Apertus, which is the Latin word for open, which is not meant to compete with ChatGPT or the big LLMs, but it's something that they built. They trained it on 1,000 languages. So it's something that is meant to be a blueprint that can be used by communities that don't have billions and billions of texts and of computing power. It is all open source. It has a curated data set that is not just anything you can find on the internet, but also there we try to not go for quantity, but for quality. And is something that they produced, published in September, October last year, and it has fallen on a huge interest, in particular by communities that are smaller, that are not like the biggest 10 languages in the world, but small communities. And if this is a useful tool that can help them use AI, can help them cultivating their culture, their language, using the tool in their language, we hope that this is gonna create a value added. So this is just one thing. And I think I co-chaired the one of the 7 chakras for the Indian Summit together with colleagues from India and from Nigeria, which is about empowerment for social inclusion, which is one of the 7 key themes for India, which is one important one. The others are also important. So we're very happy to see that, the idea that everyone should be able to benefit and not suffer under AI is very strong in the Indian Summit. Also, the 3 sutras. I think people, progress, planet is very simple, but it makes a lot of sense. We have many things. I think it's a very nice framing that our Indian friends put in this summit. And we plan to hope to be the next country. And of course, we'll build on this, that we say, okay, there's bigger cultures, bigger industries, there's smaller ones. AI should be every culture, every industry, every company should be able to use AI. So let's create this ecosystem that is not just a few big ones and we ignore the rest, but there's something in it for everyone. So we are very happy to see this focus of the Indian Summit. This is something that we think is a necessary discussion to have, and we fully support India in this.
Yeah, and I love the example that you brought out of the language apparatus, because of course in India, as Indian companies, Indian startups, Indian researchers have thought of where in the broader AI ecosystem should they focus their efforts on. One of the pillars for innovation has been around the multilingual issue. That, of course, the global models focused on English and the more widely spoken languages, because that's the data they're ingesting, That's the data that's more available in the digital world. Many startups, and I'll point to Sarvam in the case of
Hmm.
India as one of those examples, Sarvam AI, that's taken the multilingual data, multilingual diversity of India to say, okay, how can we build for these groups that might not be represented in the broad models? And I think that's a great area of common interest that could be found between countries like Switzerland and India. Okay, what does your research suggest? What does India's research suggest? And where can then we maybe learn from each other to build AI for all and AI for good? This has been great. I want to now enter into our rapid fire segment. Ambassador Schneider. We've had long and very insightful references to history and democratic politics and how that plays into AI. In the case of Switzerland, grounds up democracy. Um, but let's now enter a section which is going to be short and brief and rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you some questions that might not be as complicated, but sometimes can be. But we'll keep our answers brief and run through these questions. So let me start off with some questions around students, right? Which is a key audience for us for the podcast as well. If you were talking to a 15-year-old high school student in Switzerland, Ambassador Schneider, about AI, how would you describe the importance, significance, or challenges of AI to that 15-year-old high school student?
My kids are now 20 and 22. So they just, I would say, use AI, but think about what skills you can basically delegate to AI, but which skills you want to keep to yourself. So if you want to be the master of your life and of your future, there's some things you need to at least know how to do them, and not just let everything be done by AI in a way that you have no idea what this is doing and what comes out. So you have the one that has to be able to judge what is coming out and value or disvalue how to use AI.
And if your children were to ask you a follow-up question on that, to say, Dad, tell us which are those skills according to you that I should delegate to AI today and which ones I should maybe focus more on developing on my own, how would you answer that?
But trying to put it simple, the creative process, I think it makes sense to keep that to the human being. So having an AI, an LLM, a large language model summarizing 500 pages of scientific research into 2 pages is something that the machine is probably more efficient than yourself. But then considering, okay, whether something is missing or whether the machine got the balance right or whether you agree with the value judgment that the machine would make, and how to apply this maybe to a new context. So let's say the repetitive work can be delegated to the machine. This is what we do with production machines, with cars, but a car can still not jump across a fence. A horse or a human being is still better in jumping a fence or climbing somewhere. So whatever is special, whatever is unique, whatever applies, it also needs intuition, which is a strength that we as animals or human beings have. A machine can only calculate probabilities and then repeat what has worked most probably in the past. But in the news, at least we are not there yet. Some people say we'll get there, but whatever is the creative element and whatever is the blood and flesh and blood element, I think we should keep to ourselves and also always keep asking ourselves, does this really make sense? Even if it's written on paper or if you see it on a screen, does this make sense in my life or on this planet?
Yeah, so being still, I think critical thinking, not accepting everything as convention. Again, I'm going to stick with your kids' voice here. If they were to ask you, will AI create more jobs than it'll displace?
That's a very good question. As an economist and historian, so far, in the end, every new technology has created more new jobs than it has destroyed old jobs, which was challenging to get the ones with the jobs that were disappearing into learning new jobs. But in the end, economically, it has created more work. But the question is, this is the past. So I would not, and there are people, you have the whole range of predictions. I would not predict anything. If life goes on, and it has been, we could assume that this will also happen with AI. I hope it is the case.
Yeah.
But I don't think, no one knows. But that there at least, I think, on the other hand, what we need to do, we need to discuss. And there are some institutions like, for instance, Windfall Trust and others, what would happen if in a short time, less than 5 years, 10% or 20% of our jobs in offices, lawyers, interpreters, judges, secretaries, assistants, if 10% of the or 20% of the jobs are replaced by AI in 5 years' time? I don't say it's going to happen, but there's a risk. I also don't know how. So I think it is important that we discuss these issues and say, okay, how do we have do we develop an alert signal about this? How do we discuss this? How do we discuss this with the industries confronted with this? How do we get people on track that they know, something is moving here? So I'm not making any prediction. It can be more or less smooth, but it will change. Technologies change the world, and we need to prepare. No matter how good or bad it is, we need to prepare. I think that makes sense.
If you were now advising, if your children were slightly younger and they were just entering college, and they asked you, what should I study, the humanities or technology and engineering?
I personally was always interested in everything, and my kids are similar. But then, of course, you can't study everything. I say whatever you do, try to keep the other issues as a hobby. So if you go for humanitarian studies, try to understand how technology works a little bit. Try to understand how economies work a little bit, and the other way around. If you go for business, if you go for research, think about what it means as a human being. So again, try to have a broad horizon. And then whatever you do is sometimes also just by accident, you get into something that is nice and you stay there. So I don't care what they do as long as they stay human beings and open-minded and have values in the end.
I think very nicely put. Let me now move from students to policymakers and countries. Are we looking at a potential, especially since you're at the intersection of economics and history? I think you'll appreciate this question. Are we looking at a potential second great divergence in the world?
Everything is possible. Again, I think technology doesn't shape our world. This is not. The future is not. I don't believe that the future is planned by somebody, whether it's a god or I don't know the nature of laws. I think the future, we have it in our hand as a collective. We take decisions that have consequences. Sometimes things happen, and our reactions to things that happen also have consequences. I think it is in our hands. If we follow people that say, me first, I'm the best ones, and then my friends, and then the ones I don't know, I don't care about. This is a decision that people can take. But people can also take a decision and say, okay, we can try and make sure that no one is left behind. We can care about each other. Normally it's somewhere in the middle, but I don't believe in a deterministic future. I would rather say people have choices. Sometimes you need to fight for your choices, but you have choices. They are more or less easy, sometimes difficult. It's up to us in which direction we go, up to us all.
If you're a policymaker today in either the global south or even in the, as you said, the countries that are more developed and richer, but are not the US or China, would you prioritize AI innovation or would you prioritize AI adoption and diffusion?
Yeah, the thing normally it is not either or. I think in order to keep your autonomy or sovereignty, you also somehow need to know how these things work. So you should be part of innovation. But then again, not everyone can do everything. And in particular, if you're a smaller country, again, you need to partner. But it's always good if you're good at something, and then you partner with somebody who's good at something else, and you work together, and then together you're good at everything. So I think it is not either or. We need to try to be good at as many things as we can. On the other hand, I think it is also with all this race for faster, bigger, more, better. I think also coming back to us as human beings, we are not necessarily happier the faster our lives are. So this is what I love to learn also in other cultures, in other countries. You may have less. There's a saying, for instance, in Africa, I read somewhere, Europeans have watches, but we have time. So also there, what is quality of life? Quality of life is not necessarily bigger, faster, more, but it's about how you use things, how you spend your time, how you treat each other. Of course, you need to have something to eat. You should have a house over a roof over your head. So I'm not saying that starving is perspective. The race for bigger, higher, more, faster, louder is to some extent a natural thing. If you live in a capitalistic, competitive economic environment. But then again, there are several aspects about happiness and satisfaction. And I think this is something that we should not forget. And we also should tell our machines that we should not train our machines to only go for bigger, faster, louder, more, but also to like discuss with them what quality of life means, basically, and see whether they have new answers.
Deep questions for machines to consider. We're going to play a quick word association game, Ambassador Schneider. I'm going to name a country and tell me in the context of AI. It could be AI strategy, AI innovation, or strengths or capabilities in AI, really anything.
Yeah.
Country and AI, what word comes to mind? Switzerland,
Agile.
the United States of America,
Big.
China,
Also big.
Singapore,
Interesting, dynamic.
Nigeria,
Uh, I I don't know enough, but I guess it's also interesting.
Brazil,
In many ways, close to European discussions. Same, but different from Europe.
um, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE,
Courageous.
and lastly, but not least, of course, India.
Very exciting.
No, great. Let me now move to some personal questions. Which are applications of AI, Ambassador Schneider, that you're most excited about?
On the one hand, of course, all these large language models are exciting. I also think it is exciting to actually use AI for art, to create images, to create, knowing that there's lots of discussions that go about manipulation, but in the end, art is manipulation of reality. The question is with what intention and with what background. So AI in art, and of course everything. But I don't do it myself. I work for a government. Everything that makes processes more efficient, consuming less resources, where you can reduce, that people or goods have to travel around. I think it's exciting to use AI for good and use AI for fun. And I think it's not exciting to use AI to damage or harm other people, whatever it is.
Who are the ultimate decision makers today, Ambassador Schneider, according to you? The ultimate decision makers that are today driving the path of AI? Companies, governments, or the people?
Everything, of course, the more capital resources you have, the more you may have an immediate impact. But also in the long run, we don't know who's still there in 10 or 20 years' time of those that are considered powerful today. We'll see.
Very diplomatically answered, Mr. Schneider.
I'm doing my job for more than 20 years, so
That's right.
hope
But I
that has
think
an effect.
we can infer what you were alluding to. Uh, Personally, which application of AI are you using the most?
The most, actually, my job is actually DeepL. It's a translation software, because I work a lot with different languages, and sometimes it's just also faster or you consult and say, what would DeepL say? That's actually the one I'm using most. But then, of course, everything that I use has algorithms in it. My music streaming tool has an algorithm that proposes me. Also, there's something similar to what I've been listening before, which is many times nice, but sometimes boring, because sometimes it would be good if it would propose me something that I haven't heard yet. And so, yeah. So I'm using many algorithms in my daily life, but interpretation software is something that, of course, is a core of the text that I write and the dialogues that I'm having.
Yeah, will AI make the job of diplomats easier or harder?
it will make it faster. But it's in the end, it's human beings. If I don't think it changes the quality. There's some things that will be easier, will be faster, but other things may be more cumbersome. And in particular, with technology, is a nightmare if it doesn't work, if it doesn't deliver. Yeah, but as long as we deal with human beings, it's the human beings that make our lives, life worthy in the end. Technology is a tool. It's a tool that we should use to the extent that it helps us.
And finally, to conclude, Ambassador Schneider, just two quick questions. Which commentator or thinker or leader in the world of AI has influenced your thinking on AI the most?
There's several ones. Actually, the one that has impressed me the first, that was and I think he's Austrian professor teaching, I think in Oxford or somewhere in the UK, I think, which is called Victor Meyer-Schönberger, and that was like almost 20 years ago when we had new things like the Internet of Things and what was called at that time big data. And one of the sentences he said that I keep thinking of is, while we will be able to automate a lot of things, repetitive things, and everything will be much more efficient, but we may have to fight for autonomy, in the sense that because it's so efficient that we do the same things every day, we may have, and that everything is organized around us doing the same things every day, that we may have to fight for our freedom to do something differently today than we did the day before and the days before. And this is a phrase that struck me. Again, we didn't discuss AI and these things, but I think the fundamental, this is one of the fundamental things. How do we remain autonomous human beings, autonomous societies that are within the limits of respect to others, free to lead our lives the way we want? This is something that I keep in my back head.
Yeah, to add to the analogy, or the saying that you referred to, right? That you might have watches in Europe, but people in Africa have time. I've heard other people also say that ever since the invention of the clock or the watch, lives have become like clockwork and more mechanical.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? The point you were making earlier about quality of life
yeah.
and slowness and all of that as well. No, great. And lastly, books that you'd recommend our listeners read, and they can be really from any field, especially given that you're an economist and historian by training. And so, one, books that you recommend, and second, podcast guests that you recommend. We have.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have that much time to read books, and when I read them, I normally forget the titles. But there's one book. It's an economic book by a French guy called Thomas Piketty, who is at least in Europe is quite famous. One book that I read that impressed me was the title, at least in German, is The History of Equality, where he shows that also over time across within the same country, also inequalities, and you can have capitalistic systems with competition, but it's not a God given that the richer need to become richer and richer and the poorer need to become poor. As a society, you can take decisions that make you a more equal society or a less equal society. And for instance, the history of Sweden, where the differences was very strong at some point in time, then they voted for politicians that actually brought the society closer together. And so this is also a book that I can recommend. It's also about, that we in our society should keep discussing, how do we want to live together? What is a fair competition that we want, so that the ones that are more hardworking can get further? But what is the minimum level of equality and solidarity that we also want? Because I may have an accident tomorrow, and I may need your solidarity, no matter how rich I am. And maybe, and that we can shape this together. It's not, as a Swiss, I would not say it's not the politicians that decide. It's us that elect the politicians and that go on the streets if we think that the politicians are not doing the right thing. We are the masses. We have some power as consumers and as voters.
I think very important to keep in mind. No, great, but thank you so much. I think this has been a great conversation. I think you bring a certain level of, I think, practicality, but combined with a very long term sort of eye on the long term and eye on humanity, I think, as the core fundamental block that brings us all together. I think, which is rare now, rarer than it should be. So I thank you for bringing that lens to our conversation. I think time and again, no matter what question we were discussing, I found that you were bringing a very practical understanding of the world and its realities, the pragmatism of someone who's clearly, negotiated treaties and brought countries together, by the same time focusing on the humanitarian piece here and the long term, as opposed to short term gains that sometimes humanity gets stuck in. And so, thank you for doing that, I think, in our conversation today. And then, of course, look forward to maybe coming and visiting you in Switzerland for the next one.
Thank you very much. Pleasure is on my side. Thank
And
you.
thank you so much, Ambassador Schneider.